Hello, I'm Greg with Primal Rights. In the couple of decades that I've been in this industry, there's one thing that I've noticed that keeps popping up every few years, and that is these custom turrets, BDC reticles and or turrets. For those of you unaware, the custom turret, or BDC, stands for Ballistic Drop Compensator. The idea here is fairly simplistic. They're trying to give you a way to either dial the turrets on your scope or to hold using your reticle subtensions based on how far away your target is. So you could just take a range to the target and then you would hold on the reticle stadia or dial on the turret to the range that the target is. Now, the way that this differs from the mill system that I use and recommend, or the MOA system, or the inch per 100 yards system, or true MOA system, or whatever one of these angular units of measure we're talking about here. The way that the BDC stuff works is that instead of establishing a yardage and then computing a firing solution and then dialing that in mils or minutes, they just want you to dial straight to the range. Now, on its surface, this seems like a good idea. Why would you not want to do that? Because it's so simple. You point your rangefinder at your target, you get a distance, and then you dial exactly the range that it's at. Nothing could be faster or simpler than that, surely. Now, a lot of you out there already know that this type of methodology will not work, and you know why. But for those of you that do not, you're going to find this video very interesting. Now, the marketing efforts of these large companies have been very successful at convincing many shooters over the past couple of decades that this system has merit. Then a shooter goes out and buys one of these optics that are configured like this. Now, that'll either go really well for them, or they'll find, as many of them do, that this system is broken at the onset and will never work if they want to continue advancing in their capabilities with a precision rifle. In this episode, we're going to unpack the reasons why that happens. And by doing so, hopefully I can help some of you avoid making this little pit stop on the road in your journey of becoming a proper precision rifleman. I want to be very clear here, just so my words are not misinterpreted. There are quite a lot of rifle shooters out there that they would be able to use a BDC system to their heart's content, and they don't intend to take this discipline any more seriously than that. The bone dead simple, close range target engagements that they intend in engaging in, the BDC system may work well for some of those people. As most of you are aware, I do not cater to that audience. I'm looking to provide content here to people that are taking this discipline more seriously, that do want to have a very tight control over where their rounds are going and be able to predict that effectively on the first shot. Those of you that are engaging in precision hunting, that is what my target audience is here. And for you guys, this BDC turret and reticle, this custom turret thing, is a complete and total waste of time and money. In order to demonstrate the effects that we're going to be talking about here in this video, we're going to use some actual footage that I took through a rifle scope. And here you see a herd of pronghorn antelope at exactly 1,000 yards. Now, depending on which one of these we're looking at, the range will vary by a few yards. So we'll have to use some approximations here, but you get the general idea. This is a tangent theta 7-35 with a Gen 3 XR fine, or an XRF reticle in it. Now, I am hand holding a iPhone behind this thing, so it's not entirely steady. So I'm going to just go ahead and take a shot and stop the frame here so that we can focus on this particular pronghorn. You can see it's a relatively immature male. This would be what I would call an average size for the smaller males. The larger males would mill a little larger. Now, this is very important. The mill system that we're talking about here that you can see in this reticle, every dot, so this point right here, every one of these dots indicates 1 mil. And then each of these little dashes that are in subsequently larger markings, that is 0.2 of a mil. So the mil system is an angular unit of measure that is a 10 base system. That means we work with it in a similar fashion that we would the metric system. But it's very important to acknowledge that the metric system is linear. This is an angular unit that we're working with here. So if these are 2/10 dashes and every dot is a mil, you can see it's very easy to break this reticle down into tenths. In order to understand the mechanisms of why the BDC system is going to be ineffective, we need to understand that to create a firing solution, in order to make sure the bullet is going to intersect our target at a specific range, we have to know a lot of information. And it is in this way that the ballistic drop compensator systems are very inadequate, because as the variables change, so too does the firing solution. So if we consider our target animal here, in this case a pronghorn, you can see that at 1,000 yards, this critter is roughly 4/10 of a mil tall. So if we look at how many mils this thing is from its top of its back all the way down to the bottom of its belly, it is roughly 4/10 of a mil at 1,000 yards. I would rate this size here as average. They do get bigger than this, and when they do get bigger and older, they tend to get a little thicker through here. But again, this is just for your approximate understanding of the system. Because these units are angular, and if we use a first focal plane reticle, which I am here, that means whatever magnification I'm on, this pronghorn is going to mill 4/10 of a mil from top to bottom at this distance, no matter what magnification I'm on. It will also not matter which reticle I'm using, as long as that reticle is calibrated correctly in the mil system. It follows then that if this pronghorn were at 500 yards, well then it would mill 8/10 of a mil instead, because it would be half the distance, but yet the same size. So it would mill literally twice what you see represented here. I have a picture here of a different pronghorn. This one is much larger. And I'm going to put a mock-up representation of this same reticle over top of that pronghorn so that we can use that as an example here going forward. Now you might be thinking to yourself at this point, well, if you're going to talk about the BDC system, why would you talk about mils? Well, we need to get you to understand a few things in order for you to understand why the BDC system is not going to work. And so in order to do that, we're going to have to calculate some firing solutions. And those solutions are going to be given in something. And we're going to have those firing solutions computed in mils. Once you can visualize the differences in mils, well, then you can use whatever system you want after that to do your own calculations. So this is just meant to help you visualize why we can't use a predetermined drop compensator, which is what the custom turrets and BDC reticles are meant to do. Now, just to show you that these size relationships are real and very similar to what you can expect in the field, here is a large mature antelope at 550 yards. And obviously he's quartering away here just a little bit. So this is going to be an approximation again, but you can see that he is slightly less than 8/10 of a mil tall. This video isn't about the specifics of the mil system, so we're just going to call this 8/10 of a mil at 500 yards. Now, it may interest some of you to know that this exact pronghorn, I have been watching him for several years, and I had video of him from the previous season and the season before that. I didn't have my eye on him. He was looking pretty good, and I couldn't resist the temptation for this particular season. So he gave me an opportunity at, I believe, 330 yards, and that was all it wrote for him. And he now lives here with me on the wall. We come now back to our image of the pronghorn at 500 yards. And you'll notice I've got a little X here, a little rotating X. Now, I'm going to be using this little rotating X to call out impacts based on our predicted firing solution. So when I call something out, I want you to look for this little rotating guy right here. Now I'm going to overlay the Applied Ballistics mobile calculator on the screen, so you can see the calculations that I'm doing real time. We're going to choose a cartridge that a great number of you are going to be using, and that is the 6.5 PRC. Now, bullet type and the velocity and barrel length and all of these different variables here will have a great difference on the predicted outcome, but we're just going to use a 143 grain ELDX at 2,950 foot per second. Now, I'd encourage you to set up your own ballistic calculators and follow along with the video, and you can do the mock calculations as well to see just how much of a difference these effects will create in your firing solution. You can see here on this screen the different variables that we're going to be changing, such as pressure and temperature. There are many variables that affect the bullet's flight, but we're going to be focusing on the vertical displacement here, not so much the windage. And so the primary variables that we're going to be changing are going to be the pressure and temperature. This is the actual firing solution page. So this is where we get the result of our calculation, and it tells us all the information about how we would dial the scope or what we would hold in order to achieve a perfect impact. I'm going to be showing two different examples here, one at 500 yards and one at 1,000 yards. And the reason for that is the BDC system can be effective inside of close ranges. And it just depends on the ballistic superiority of the cartridge that you're using. So basically the bullet you're running and how fast you're able to push it as a function of barrel length and cartridge and so on. If that combination is superior enough, then you can put this thing to work on a big game sized target and have some decent success. But that limitation really starts coming into play at around 500 yards. It can be much closer than that if your cartridge is inferior enough. So for our purposes, I'm going to do a 500 yard and then a 1,000 yard of each of the conditions that we're going to work with here. Now, pronghorn season happens generally in October. And in October in South Dakota, we have a wildly varied weather, to the point where you can be having a literal blizzard, right? Sub-zero temperatures, a literal snowstorm blizzard happening in the morning. And then by that afternoon, it will be in excess of 80 or 85 degrees. This kind of weather situation is going to accent just exactly what happens if you went out there with a predetermined come up or predetermined firing solution. So for our purposes here, I'm going to show something that is extremely common, not quite as severe as what I described before, but something that happens every single year, every season. It seems like this happens. So it will be oftentimes beneath freezing when we get up. So let's just say that it would be 20 degrees. And that is not exactly what I would call uncommon. It would be 20 degrees, 25 degrees in the morning. So we'll set 25 degrees, and humidity, I'm just going to leave that at 50% for our purposes here. And pressure, it's not uncommon that we would have that be different. And this pressure is dependent upon essentially your elevation. And so we'll just set that at 27 inches of hydrogen and 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and then we'll compute a firing solution here. And the wind is, of course, 10 miles an hour at 3 o'clock. Now, just by changing this one temperature variable, let's see what happens to our firing solution. Here we have a firing solution that says we need to come up 2.3 mils. And again, we're going to primarily ignore our wind here. We're just going to look at elevation because adding the wind in as a variable is going to get even more complicated. We're going to address that a little bit later. First, let's just look at the temperature as an isolated variable. Nothing else changes, just the temperature, which of course that's very rare, folks. So at this condition, we've got 2.3 mils of elevation required. If I back up and set this to a very common afternoon temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit, we see we have now 2.2. So we have changed the firing solution 1/10 of a mil just by changing the temperature from a very common morning to afternoon temperature variance that we typically see during season. The way these BDC systems work is someone has done the calculation for you in advance. So we're making a lot of assumptions here. And the custom systems, when it comes to the turrets, well, they sell these things and they say, well, here's your turret for this temperature. Here's your turret for the next temperature. And as long as you're within range on the temperature, that's the turret that you want to use. Now, in the case of a reticle, well, that's baked into the scope. You're not changing your reticle, okay? Okay, well, what does a 1/10 of a mil look like on our firing solution? So here it is. If I went out and this temperature variance happened and my turret was calibrated for the original firing solution, 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and the condition changed and now it's actually 70 degrees Fahrenheit, we're holding 2.3 mils based on the turret, but we only need 2.2. Well, this is what that looks like at 500 yards. Now, as you can see, this is still well within the kill zone here. This, at 500 yards, this variable by itself is not going to create any real problems. We're going to still have a very effective hit here. Okay, now let's go back and change our temperature back to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and we'll change our distance to 1,000 yards. So the initial firing solution then is in a 20 degree condition is calling for 7.3 mils of elevation. Well, what happens when we change that to 70 degrees? So now it's only calling for 7 mils. So that's 3/10 of a mil of error. Now the relevance of what we've just demonstrated is that from morning to afternoon in a pretty normal temperature swing, we went from being aligned at 1,000 yards to shooting well over this animal's back, and we didn't change any other variables. As you can see, the problem is much more severe as we get to 1,000 yards. Now, let's isolate the temperature, and we're just going to set it at 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That's kind of a nice middle of the road there for conditions. And we're going to simulate going up in elevation or having a pressure swing. So it's 2,300 feet here where I'm at, and 27, maybe high 26s, all the way up to about 28 inches of hydrogen is a very standard condition that we would run into here. Obviously, I'm using station pressure here, not altitude-adjusted barometric pressure. I would strongly encourage you to run station pressure in all of your calculations rather than barometric pressure. Maybe we'll do a video on that topic in the future. So we're at 2.2 mils at 500 yards, and at 1,000 yards, we are at 7.1, based at, this is our baseline at 50 degrees of temperature. Now, let's change, we'll go back to 500 yards, and let's change 1 atmosphere. Now, basically, 1,000 feet in elevation change will produce 1 atmosphere, or 1 inch of hydrogen as a readout here. And all this is very approximate, obviously. If you want a higher level understanding of that, I'd recommend you go research pressure and learn how our atmosphere works in regards to pressure. For our purposes here, we're just going to change this from 27 to 28. That is indicative of the highest swing that we would typically see from a standard low pressure to a high pressure system. That's pretty severe, okay? And this is not going to be the same for you guys living in mountainous regions, so let's deal with that separately. So at 500 yards, now we're at 2.3 mils. Now, we've already seen a tenth of a mil of error in our 500-yard solution before, so you have some idea of what that looks like. Let's take a look at our 1,000-yard solution, and we're at 7.3 here. And so, again, some error, and error enough to cause a real problem here. Here's what that plot looks like if we were to take that shot with this error in our solution. Now let's simulate going up in elevation. Those of you in very mountainous regions, it is not exactly super uncommon for you to zero your rifle down on the valley floor somewhere or down off of the mountains. And so from morning to afternoon, you could experience several thousand feet of elevation change. And this will start to show itself in a little more vigor here, this singular variable of pressure, for those of you that are hunting in mountainous regions. So let's simulate changing the elevation. 1,000 feet, 1 atmosphere, let's just say that we're going to do a 3,000 feet elevation change. And instead of 27, we'll do 24. So we went up in elevation, and there's now less pressure up there. And keep in mind, the temperature and everything else here stayed constant. All I'm changing is the pressure. Here's the 500-yard solution showing 2.1. Now, we established our baseline earlier. We've got quite an error here based on this. Here's what that now looks like at 1,000 yards. Significant error, folks. We have a massive problem here. You didn't just kind of miss your point of aim. You shot clean over the back of this thing by a large margin. Now let's back up and we'll standardize the temperature and pressure again. And we're going to change another variable that those of you that have been watching my channel are intimately familiar with already. And we're going to demonstrate how the wind change can produce an error in your shot. We're going to leave this at 27 inches of hydrogen and 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And our distance will start at 500 yards again. Now this time, what I'm going to do is demonstrate a very common wind error that happens when you're out in the field. Let's just say you've got a 10 mile an hour wind and your target animal's at 500 yards and the wind is 1 o'clock. Well, anyone that's ever been out in the world shooting, you know that it's never 1 o'clock. It can very easily switch direction on you. And shooting in a 12 o'clock or a 6 o'clock condition is one of the worst possible conditions that you can find yourself. Now let's say the wind shifts from 1 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Now look at that difference. When we start over here at 1 o'clock, we're at 2.3 mils. When we go to 11 o'clock, we're at 2.4 mils of elevation. Now that is separate from the wind call itself. Just because the wind changed direction, it changes what we see here in our predicted firing solution. And folks, this stuff tracks pretty good. This software, the Applied Ballistics software, tracks with reality very well on aerodynamic jump based on what I've seen in my experience shooting in the world. So we see the error here just by the wind switching like that. From a very small degree, we see a massive error at 500 yards. Now let's see what that looks like at 1,000 yards. And we'll do the exact same thing. 1 o'clock wind condition, we're at 7.2. But if I go over here to 11 o'clock, there's our tenth of a mil out there at distance as well. And it makes a lot more difference out there than it does up close. Now, this doesn't fully accent how severe the problem with a BDC reticle is, because this is based on just the wind switching a little bit. This is far from the worst case scenario. Let's get our target back to 500 yards. And let's set a full value wind. So let's say that you're not shooting in a 1 o'clock condition. Instead, let's look at the difference, the worst case scenario. Like if you're going to be shooting a 3 o'clock wind or a 9 o'clock wind. And remember, it's not like the BDC knows this. It's not like your turret or your reticle knows that you're going to be shooting in that wind condition and that it needs to adjust in order to account for these variables. Now, this really demonstrates one of the core weaknesses of the BDC system, because you will never know what the wind condition is going to be until you're in it. So in this 10-mile-an-hour wind at 3 o'clock, so a full value wind, is producing a firing solution of 2.2 mils. If we switch this to 9, it's 2.4 mils of elevation. Now at 500 yards, this is what that looks like on the animal. Now let's set back to 3 o'clock, and we'll change this to 1,000 yards. And we're seeing a solution here of 7.1. When we change this, it is now 7.3. So as you can see, aerodynamic jump is fairly linear. We're getting the same error, which is 0.2 of a mil from 500 to 1,000. Still, as we've already established, 0.2 of a mil of error at 1,000 yards, yeah, you can forget about having a high probability of actually hitting this animal well. So you shouldn't even be taking this shot if you're not accounting for this properly. Most of you should understand by now, this custom turret and custom reticle thing doesn't even begin to work properly at 1,000 yards, despite the advertisements to the contrary. Now, I know what many of you are thinking, that, well, how much worse can it get? Well, let me show you how much worse it can get. 10 mile an hour is a pretty calm condition. By changing it to 20 mile an hour and 3 o'clock, did you see how we picked up 1/10 of a mil of error just in our baseline? Okay? By going to 20 miles an hour, because of aerodynamic jump, it now knows, hey, we're not even starting in the same place anymore. So it's 2.1 mils now, and we've gathered 1/10 of a mil of error in our solution. Now at 500 yards, let's take a look at what happens when we switch over to 9 o'clock. Folks, that is 4/10 of an error in 20 mile an hour. We doubled the wind speed, and we doubled the aerodynamic jump error. Now, it is not exactly a super uncommon thing to be out hunting in a 20 mile an hour condition. Out here where I'm at, that is super common. If you can't shoot in a 20 mile an hour condition, you might as well stay home, because the number of days that we get during hunting season that aren't blowing 20 miles an hour is very limited. Here's what 4/10 looks like at 500 yards. Now let's reset back to 3 o'clock, and we'll look at 1,000-yard firing solution here. And again, we've got that same error representing. We're starting with 7 mils, and when we go over to 9 o'clock, we are now at 7.4. So again, the same thing. Now, we are not even remotely having a chance of hitting this animal properly. Now let's reel things back down to reality here and put a 10 mile an hour, and we'll go back to a 3 o'clock wind. That is just kind of our standard, okay? And we'll go back to 500 yards. Now let's back up, and instead of going for the individual variables that change, let's stack a few of these variables together. So here's our baseline at 500 yards, and here's our baseline at 1,000 yards. Now let's say instead of 50 degrees, it's 80 degrees. Instead of 27, we went up the mountain a little bit, and now it's 25. So we'll change 2 variables there. Here's what we have at 500 yards by changing just a little bit of temperature and a little bit of pressure. Now this is not accounting for the wind change. If we take this wind and push it off axis, we pick up a ton of error in our solution there, don't we? All I have to do is go from 3 to 2 o'clock, and we pick up another 1/10 of a mil of error. If I keep going and switch it over to the other side of the clock, and I'm shooting the other direction, we pick up more error. We'll set this back to 3 o'clock, and we'll look at 1,000 yards and compare that. As you can see, again, at 1,000 yards, we've got severe problems here, folks. This is not even remotely close to providing an acceptable result. And when we start modifying the wind, the situation gets absolutely untenable. Well, there you have it, folks. The math on this is pretty simple. It's super easy to demonstrate. Any of you that have access to a ballistic computer in the form of a Kestrel or a phone app, as long as that thing computes for the correct variables, mainly the temperature, the pressure, and the aerodynamic jump that's created by the variances in the wind, well, you can play with this to your heart's content at whatever range you want to establish what range you'd be feeling comfortable taking a BDC reticle or a custom turret out in the field. Bottom line, folks, even with something like a 6.5 PRC, when you're talking about a wind condition and a temperature condition from morning to afternoon by itself, and maybe it's a tiny bit of pressure, if at all, creating in excess of 3 or 4 tenths of error at 500 yards, then you see how very easily that could still be going on for you even at 300 or 400 yards, because these effects are very severe. And if your target is small enough, you have no chance in the world of hitting it unless you're computing for this stuff correctly. Now, you're going to have to judge for yourself what range that is with the cartridges and bullets that you're using, because I can't possibly predict what your needs are. And a lot of you'll be perfectly happy just not shooting anything beyond 300 yards. And if you're shooting big game, well, that animal is going to be generally large enough to where it's going to mask the error. And as long as you're doing your part and getting that shot made honestly, then the target animal is still going to go down. You're still going to get a lethal hit there, provided you've done everything else correctly. But that's not what this channel is about, is it? It's for people that don't want to rely on error baked in and use some sort of goofy tactic to overcome it. This conversation around BDC turrets and BDC reticles, you will always find people advocating an offset. And so what they'll say is, here's what your BDC is, and it's calibrated for this condition at this elevation and whatever little program they've got laid out there. And then they'll tell you something like, well, if the temperature changes to this, then you need to run this offset. And so you just need to subtract this much, and the reticle is got this weird little stadia on it that says how much that is. And folks, it is all just a guess at that point. It is all just a guess. So whatever system they're advocating is absolutely pointless, because there is no argument to make here that says that system is better than the mill system or MOA system. It really doesn't matter which one you're choosing, as long as it's at a pure angular unit of measure. And of course, I would recommend that you run a first focal plane reticle in your scope to free yourself from the magnification ring, so that your reticle is going to subtend correctly regardless of what magnification you're on. That system, any angular system, you can map your reticle in advance. If you want predetermined ranges that you can dial in, we can very easily strap a little chart to the side of your rifle that says, if it's this temperature and the critter's at this yardage, here is my come up and here's my wind call in a 10 and a 20 mile an hour wind. Folks, you can put all this stuff right inside your scope cap. Here's an example of the typical data that I'll put inside my own scope cap. Now, it's just a little spreadsheet that I made that's got this thing laid out in the right way. I just put the data in there. I'll compute everything with my ballistic computer, and then I'll manually enter these numbers in there and print this thing out, cut it out, and glue it inside my scope cap. You could just as easily stick this on the side of your rifle with some clear tape or something. There's all kinds of methods. You can print out a bunch of these cards with different elevation and different temperature data on them, so that you can just throw a little pack of cards in your backpack or stick it in your shirt pocket or something. Bottom line, if we want to take predetermined firing solutions with us in the field, we can and we should, because we never know when our electronics will fail us. So it's always good field practice to bring some hard data with you if you're going on a hunt. The difference is all of these variables that we're going to encounter during our shot, provided that our electronics, our laser rangefinder, and our ballistic firing solution calculator are working correctly, well then we account for every single one of these variables right in our shot. We don't have to worry about one of these variables sneaking past us. I mean, we've got enough work to do here, folks, in just calling the condition, the wind, watching the mirage, getting the wind figured out. We've got enough work to do here. We don't need to be worrying about some goofy offset in some proprietary system that some big box brand wants to market to us to try to make things easier, when all they're doing is guaranteeing wounded animals running around in the field. Because that's the truth of what actually happens when people field these BDC systems. They don't have the knowledge and understanding of these variables that are drastically affecting their bullet's flight through the atmosphere. They haven't put in the work to really study and understand the art of long-range shooting. And as a result, they take these baked in, make it quick and easy stuff that these big box brands are irresponsibly putting out there in the world, and they wound a bunch of animals. I see it every single season. Guys that shouldn't be shooting past 200 yards are out there wounding critters because they've got a scope turret on that says all they got to do is dial it to this yardage, and it's a sure deal. So you big box brands out there that are trying to advocate for these systems, and you're coming out with new products, and yet again, for the 50th time in my career, you guys are launching this advertising campaign to try to get people to use these custom turrets. I don't care which one of you companies are responsible for this. You're not doing anybody any favors. You're making the sport look bad. That's all you're doing. And you're throwing out the guys of the easy road to captivate the lazy and worst class of shooter that we could have in this industry. And you're causing them to go afield and give our industry a black eye. I've only demonstrated a few scenarios here. I'm sure you guys have a big imagination and you can dream up all kinds of scenarios. I encourage you all to do that. Sit there with a picture of a critter, superimpose a reticle on it at a couple of distances, and do your own calculations and plot where those shots would hit if you didn't account for that error that exists as a result of those changing conditions. And you can make your own judgments for whether or not you should use this system, or whether you should be a proper steward and learn how to execute these shots properly using the science and technology that we have available today. I wonder if any of you out there know any nice people. People that everyone seems to like. People that no one really has a problem with. I'd like to start by sharing a quote from the poet and novelist Charles Mackay. He's a Scottish poet and novelist. "You have no enemies, you say. Alas, my friend, the boast is poor. He who has mingled in the fray of duty that the brave endure must have made foes. If you have none, small is the work that you have done. You've hit no traitor on the hip. You've dashed no cup from the perjured lip. You've never turned the wrong to right. You've been a coward in the fight." I don't remember where I first heard that quote, but it really struck me, because it made me realize something that I had never understood before that. Earlier in my life, I had always thought that the nice people were doing it right. It turns out that I was completely wrong about most of what I thought about these nice people. Now, this segment of the video today is going to differ from those in the past, because today I'm not going to share a Bible verse with you. The reason why is because I think there's quite a lot of you out there that have become somewhat complacent. You're happy to rely on me to share scripture with you, and as a result, you don't go searching for the scripture yourself. You don't actually pick up a Bible and read, as I've all but begged you to do. So today, if you want to find out whether or not my take on the information that I'm about to present is correct, whether or not I'm speaking with biblical authority, whether or not my beliefs are aligned with that of Jesus, and whether or not my beliefs are aligned with that of God, you're going to have to go and do the research yourself. You're going to have to pick up a Bible and see if you can find something in there that either refutes or supports what I'm saying here today. I can assure you I have done that, and I have found much support for the argument that I'm going to be making here today. But what I think about this doesn't matter in the slightest. What the truth is, that's what matters. What the Bible says about this, that's what matters. I think far too many of you have been taking my word for what I'm presenting here. I think far too many of you have been being lazy and just assuming that I'm correct, thinking that somehow I'm going to be happy with the fact that you take what I say at face value. When in actuality, what I want, what my greatest desire is for you to improve yourselves. You don't do that by being a parrot. You don't do that by just replicating what you see here and trying to emulate me. I am not the correct person to be emulating. You are supposed to be emulating Jesus Christ. That's who you're supposed to be following. You're not supposed to be following me. You're supposed to be following him, and you're supposed to be doing exactly as he says to do, and doing exactly as we have witnessed him do during the short period of time that he was here on this earth with us. We have this recorded in great detail in the Bible. So today, I'm not going to accommodate you. Instead, I'm going to say, if you want to find out whether or not I'm speaking truth or not, you go get in the Bible and you figure it out for yourself. But coming back to the topic at hand here, this issue of nice people. When I first was confronted with this idea, it occurred to me that I was dead wrong. Nice people are actually some of the worst people on the planet. Now, subsequently, when I came into this, I found some other very intelligent people, guys like Jordan Peterson, that were talking about how nice people have perpetrated some of the most evil things that the world has ever seen. And just in line with this quote here that I read at the beginning of this segment, it basically means that if you are not offending anyone, then you are a master manipulator. You're actually one of the worst people on the planet. Now, I have the great fortune to have come to know Jesus later in my life. I had no right relationship with God, Jesus, or the Holy Spirit for the first part of my life, but I came to know him later. Now, what that meant for me was that I was a significantly worse person. Now, I say the good fortune and benefit, where some of you might be thinking, well, that's a terrible thing. Actually, I think it's wonderful, because just as all of the best people that I really respect, when I read the Bible and read their stories, many of their lives started out that way as well. They too did not know Jesus. They didn't have a right relationship with God. They only came to have one later in life. And in some instances, those people, the most prominent people that you can read about in the Bible, folks, they came to be the best examples of how we're supposed to be, despite having beginnings that didn't even remotely resemble how we're supposed to be. So it's not uncommon that God used people that are not being righteous, not the correct, proper examples of how to be, and then he creates this wonderful example. But it doesn't happen until they come to know the Lord, until they come to obey and worship him. Only then do they unlock the power and potential that they had stored in their life. And God knew that before those people were even born. So I say the good fortune to not have known him earlier in life, because that has given me the ability to walk on both sides. Once upon a time, I was not a nice man. Point in fact, I was terrible in lots of ways. Some of you probably can't imagine it now, but I swore like a trucker. I had the most awful mouth imaginable. I could go down the list of all the things that I was doing wrong, but it would take way too long, trust me. Yeah, sure, there was people worse than me. There generally always is someone worse, just like there's always someone better. But this isn't a competition. This is be as close as we can be to Jesus, and that's it. That's the end. You've been saved already if you've come under Jesus, and that's it. It's just do your level best here. Well, this walking on that side, being extremely aggressive, up to and including one wrong word from you would have me feed you a knuckle sandwich in a half a second flat. I wouldn't even hesitate to get into a physical altercation. As I look back on that today, I'm not proud of that. But I don't regret it either. And here's why. My having walked on that side, being extraordinarily wrong and aggressive, I experienced the kinds of people that liked me and didn't like me. And if I'm honest about that period of my life, I met quite a number of people that were what I would call today good people. Now you'll notice I didn't say nice people. We'll get back to that. But I met some good people. And you know, those good people couldn't and wouldn't and shouldn't tolerate me. Those good people did not stay in my life very long. And knowing who I was then, I wouldn't have got along with myself at that particular time either. I have no expectation that any good person would have got along with me in any capacity. So I have the benefit of seeing who liked what I was doing, who thought it was cool, who wanted to be around me and be in my life when I was like that. And I also got to witness the kind of people that didn't. They didn't think it was cool. They didn't think it was funny. They didn't want to hang around me. Now, at this particular juncture in my life, where I have gone to the altar of sacrifice and dropped off as many pieces of myself as I could, I continually do that on a daily basis. I find things about how I'm operating and how I'm being that I don't like, and I get rid of them. That's a polar opposite to what I would do then. Yeah, sure, there was probably marked improvement from when I was like 16 years old to when I was like 25 years old. But realistically, I was still doing so many things wrong that it couldn't possibly have been labeled anything other than wrong. What I found was very interesting, because the more that I would go to the altar and the more that I would strip away parts of myself that I didn't like, the more I would not get along with the people that used to think I was cool. The people that used to not only tolerate me, but have me around willingly. What I found was those people wanted less and less to do with me. And I would look at them and I would look at the way that they're doing things, and I found more and more problems with how they're operating. Now, around the same time, I started to realize a very uncomfortable fact. When I had the worse tendencies or the less desirable life as I look at it today, those people that came around me were really lacking. They were not good at all. There was core, critical, broken pieces in those people, and they weren't even interested in fixing them. The effect that this had on me was I got worse. Those people that wanted to hang around me as a result of those qualities that today I look at with disdain, right? Going out and going to parties and doing things like that, right? Go to a bar or do something like that. Folks, you wouldn't catch me dead in a place that serves alcohol these days. If I'm there, it's because there's a restaurant there and I'm not home and I can't eat at home. But otherwise, I'm not caught dead in a place that serves alcohol. And I refuse to drink the stuff. And I don't use tobacco either. And I don't condone it. And bottom line, patterns of behavior that people exhibit that do that sort of thing. What do you think is more likely? Somebody that smokes and drinks and goes to the bar being a right and proper upright example of what Jesus would have them be? Or is it more likely that someone that doesn't do those things would be a better example of what Jesus would want for them? If we're trying to be as good of a person as we can be, are we going to be benefited and have a higher probability of being as good as we can be if we're smoking and drinking and going to the bar? Or would we have a higher probability of being a better example if we didn't engage in those things? If we didn't hang out around those people? Now again, there's a lot of scripture here that can lean a lot of different ways, depending on what you have in your life. There's some of you out there right now that are watching this. You drink alcohol. You use tobacco. And you hear me say these things. And so the first thing that you're going to do is go and look for something in the Bible that says that that's excusable. You want to go look for proof to let you off the hook, to make what you're doing right and what I'm saying wrong. Because that's what's important to you. Not that you set yourself up for success and give yourself the highest probability of being as right as you know how to be, but instead to do it as easy as you can possibly do it. See, you think that you can not take the narrow path and not take the wide path, but you can find a path that's somewhere in the middle. You think that you can mingle with people that they don't even know what path they're on. They've never even considered that there's different paths, that there's different choices. They're in a constant state of reaction. Every single minute of every day that they're conscious, they're just reacting to what's going on around them. They're not thinking about Jesus or trying to have a relationship with him at all. They're just being. You think you can hang around those people and somehow that's not going to affect you? Maybe instead of looking for the Bible verse that says it's okay for you to go out and get blasted every Friday night, maybe instead of looking for the Bible verse that says it's okay for you to smoke 2 packs of cigarettes every day, or to never, ever be without a big giant dip in your face and, contort your lip and make sure that you look just as cool as you need to be in order to be around the group of people that you're with. Or maybe instead of getting your 472nd tattoo so that the tough guys that you're hanging around won't think that you're a little sissy because you don't have enough tattoos. Folks, maybe instead of trying to be so worldly, maybe you should think about being more holy. Now, getting back to the nice guys for a second, I've described a few things just now that is associated with the bad crowd. The bad people do those things. And you nice people out there, you look down on those people. Those are bad people. Stay away from the bad people. You say, it doesn't matter what they do or what they're engaged in, you don't approve of it. While at the same time, someone could show up in your presence, offend you in every way imaginable, and you will say nothing. It doesn't matter what behavior they exhibit, you will say and do nothing. And you think that because you're a nice guy, that somehow puts you on the narrow path. That tolerating every evil, tolerating every offense, somehow that makes you a right and proper Christian. Need I remind you that Jesus flipped tables, chased people with whips, and chastised people verbally everywhere he went? Jesus wasn't liked by everybody. He was perfect, but he was not liked. You know who didn't like Jesus? The bad people. You know who doesn't like me today? You know who doesn't like the way that I give, the way that I speak? The people that don't like me today, that don't like this message, that don't like any message that I put out, are the same people that I would probably get along with great once upon a time. I would swear the way that they swear. I would pursue the worldly cool things that they pursue. They might think that I was pretty cool. So now that I'm really trying to put away the childish things, trying to pursue Jesus with all of my might, with all of my strength, all of my heart, all of my energy, those people will not like me. So I went from good people not liking me as a result of being a very poor representation of what a proper good Christian is supposed to be, to having the people that are not good representations of a good Christian not liking me. You know what's never happened to me ever in my entire life? I have never been liked by the majority of people. That's one thing that has never been present. And that's when I finally realized that these nice people that are well liked, it's just a show. It's not real. Because those nice people, yeah, they might not go so far as to talk dirty about you behind your back. They probably will. At least in my experience, these nice people that seem to be well liked by so many, if they don't outrightly talk about you behind your back, they certainly will not take any opportunity to bless you when you should be blessed. You can help those nice people to your heart's content. They will never show right gratitude for you, because what they really care about isn't you. What they care about is themselves and the image of themselves in your mind. They are so guarded about what they say. They are so guarded about what they do in your presence and in everyone's presence. They can't stand the thought of you not liking them, because then that would take away their ability to manipulate you into cooperation if they ever need you for something. When I came to the realization about the actual character of these nice people, I couldn't get them out of my life fast enough. I would rather have an enemy, someone that hates me with the passion of 1,000 stars, than to have one of those nice people in my life. But you know what I can't get enough of? I can't get enough of good people. Now, a good person, when they see you behaving in a way that is improper, when they see you behaving in a way that doesn't line up with the best practices of Christianity and being a good person that they know of, they will say something. They will try to correct you. They will try to educate you. You see, they care about you. They actually care enough to stop you from hurting yourself by behaving poorly, if they can. They'll come to you out of sincere love and say, man, you are messing up. Look, this thing that you're doing here is not going to work, okay? You can't be doing this way. They won't accept your excuses, your reasons. If they find it to be wrong and objectionable, they will anchor in right there. And either you move, because they won't. They'll let you go off and move from that spot. But when you encounter them next, they'll be right there where you left them, waiting for you to alter your behavior. And if you don't, they're not going to just say it's okay for the sake of getting along with you so that they can use you for something in the future. If they have a problem with you, they'll say it exactly how they feel it. And they'll let the chips fall where they may. They know that if you don't respond rightly to that, then you're no right person to have around them anyway. And so it's very important that they get away from you if they find that this objectionable thing that you're doing persists despite their continued counsel. Eventually, it will become critical for them to get away from you. Because just like I have found in my life, every other good person that I've met in life knows this as well. If we allow people that are continually violating our principles anywhere near us or anywhere near anyone that we care about, then we or the people we care about will start to take on those negative traits. So it becomes a critical survival mechanism as a right Christian to get away from those people. Now, this isn't to say we give up on everyone. This is to say that we draw a very clearly defined, easily seen line in the sand. We tell them about it truthfully, and then they make their choice on what they do or don't do. Because the last thing in the world we want to do is mess with free will. I can tell you from personal experience, it just doesn't work. If somebody's not ready to grow, they're not going to grow. And you might be able to get temporary compliance out of them, but it'll only be temporary. And the only thing that it's going to do is foster a whole bunch of lies and bad behavior and a bunch of stupid defense mechanisms out of that person because they don't get it. They don't get what you're saying. They don't understand what you want of them. And they have no intention of complying. They just need to put up the guise of compliance just enough to get you off their back. What they're going to do is just put on a little bit different chameleon skin so you have enough of the appearance of change to leave them alone. My suggestion for you all today is to learn how to recognize the difference between a nice person and a good person. Watch those nice people very, very closely. Meanwhile, those good people, open your hearts to them, invite them into your life, show them your goodness, show them just how much you appreciate their presence and their willingness to be a good, right, proper, upstanding example in your life. You'd be surprised at just how far a little bit of gratitude goes with those good people. Their expectations of others are already so low as a result of their knowledge of how they're supposed to be in light of the failings of this world and the people in it, that when they experience a tiny bit of gratitude from good people, they are eternally grateful. Because as I've learned trying to be a good person, it is extremely hard to remember the fact that Jesus suffered all of this and much, much more. So then it's right that we suffered this as well. That we suffer these people that wish us ill. And so when we get an opportunity to have someone demonstrate gratitude to us, and it feels wonderful. It feels better than possibly anything else that can happen to you on this earth. Sincere gratitude from a person that we know to be really trying to live a good and right life. Gratitude from people that are busy, working 10 times as hard to justify their poor example, to make reasons and excuses for why they are the way that they are and why they need to be that way, instead of acknowledging that they can't continue that way and they shouldn't continue that way and they should try to be better. Gratitude from those types of people is very meaningless once you reach a certain point. If you're trying to be one of those good, right examples, don't be stingy with your gratitude to the other good people that you encounter. I hope you've all enjoyed this message today. I hope you have a wonderful week, and God bless you all.